Week 12 of Super Rugby is looming large. Well, the first game of 4 is this morning. Now, this weekend is very special because all 5 South African teams are playing, and there's one South African derby. Our sport editor Garrett and chief writer Rob are joining me in studio to give their expert predictions. Welcome.
Morning, Jen.
I'm very excited to hear your predictions because, as you know, this means chocolate for me on Monday.
Hopefully not on me. Yeah.
Garen, why don't you take us through the first game? It's happening at
11:40.
11:40 today.
Correct. It's the Sharks' first game of their four-match tour overseas. They're in Melbourne playing the Rebels. And, you know, we've lost all 12 games we've played so far from a South African point of view in Australasia. But I think it's going to be a 13th lucky, if you like, for South Africa. The Sharks, you know, although I think a lot of people are seeing it as the easiest game of the tour, I think it'll still be a pretty tough ask. The Rebels obviously have a lot to play for in their conference. So the Sharks, you know, coming off their horrible defeat against the Highlanders, I think it's going to be closer than some people think. You know, the first match of the tour, you're not too sure what to expect. You've flown the whole across the world, basically. But I think the Sharks will have enough. Jake White, I'm sure, has had a go at his team following their last performance. I think the Sharks will get up in the end. I think it'll be fairly close. I'm going for Sharks by 5.
Okay, so we're crossing our fingers for 13th time lucky. Rob, do you agree?
I do, Jen. I'm going to go even a little bit more perhaps emphatic than that and say perhaps Sharks by 7 or 8. Certainly factoring in the possibility that the Rebels could win. I'm not discounting that. I mean, I think all South Africans will be worried. You can't just sort of instantaneously say, oh no, a South African team will bank a win overseas, because our record is so poor this year that you have to do it very cautiously. But the wise men have spoken. We think that the Sharks will do enough. They have had a bit of a sort of an implosion in the last couple of weeks. They won the game against the Cheetahs, where they didn't play particularly well, and then had a real comeuppance against the Highlanders. I think that would have been a wake-up call. I think that there will be greater urgency from them. I think, you know, they've obviously got to acclimatise. We've got to take that into account. But I do still think that they'll be able to do enough with some big guns back in their side. They'll get over the line. They thrashed the Rebels last season, Garen. Of course, that was in Durban, completely different story. And you never know what to expect from the Rebels in Melbourne. But no, Sharks will do this one.
Well, I'm happy to hear that we're starting off with our home team. So let's go on to the second game. Garen, your predictions.
Okay, well, things are about to get a lot worse.
I thought so.
I'm 100% convinced that the Lions will get thumped by the Chiefs. That's the second South African game. You know, the Lions also on their overseas tour now, playing their first match, and they're up against the 2-time defending champions, the Chiefs, who, it has to be said, haven't looked a patch on the form that they showed last year. But at home in Hamilton, they'll still have way too much for the Lions. I'm thinking as many as 20 points, maybe even more. I see the Lions have named their team. They've dropped Marnus Botha, who was their saviour in the first 3 or 4 games of the season. They've gone with Elton Jantjies at number 10. I'm not sure that's a wise move. I think they're pretty much conceding defeat in this opening game, already looking ahead at their remaining matches on tour. I've said many times in this program that the Lions will lose more games than they'll win this season, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be true come the end of the season. I don't see the Lions winning any of their overseas games. In fact, I don't think they'll win another game in this whole tournament. They could still end up as the worst South African team. So, yeah, not looking good in the second match, but overseas we're going for, I think Rob will agree, 1 victory, 1 defeat.
Yeah, do you agree? I'm certainly not going to disagree on that one. I'm going to go Chiefs by about 30 to 35 points even. That's the way it could shape. Look, you don't want to knock the Lions too much. They have been very spirited this season, but I just think with the loss of a couple of key players, they're going on tour now. It's almost sort of virgin territory for a lot of their players who'll be making their sort of Super Rugby overseas debuts in the Lions ranks. So they really are a very rookie side. Everything points towards the Chiefs wanting to get their season back on track. I mean, there'll be more urgency, Garen, for them, won't there? Because they've seen how the Highlanders have suddenly crept up into a strong position. A couple of the other New Zealand teams going strong. The Chiefs simply have to get back on track. So everything points to them really getting very focused, and it could just be a bit of a bloodbath in Hamilton.
Well, you guys have both convinced me on your predictions thus far. Let's go into game 3 now, Garrett.
Okay, so we're back in South Africa now. The third game is the Stormers at home against the Highlanders. That's at 3 o'clock South African time. The Highlanders obviously coming off their convincing victory over the Sharks, which was really impressive. And the Stormers coming off a heavy defeat against the Cheetahs. So, you know, on paper, you'd think that the Highlanders have a fantastic chance of making it 2 from 2 from their South African tour. You know, again, the Stormers back at home, where they'll be a lot better than they were in Bloemfontein. Again, a difficult game to call. It's one of those games, you expect the home side and the Stormers to win,
right,
but you wouldn't be shocked, thanks to the season that the Stormers are having, if the Highlanders didn't make it 2 from 2. I expect an entertaining game. Both the Stormers in particular don't have a lot to play for. The Highlanders, they're doing really well suddenly in the New Zealand Conference, which is incredibly competitive this season. So they're certainly not going to lie down and get rolled over. They've got some exciting players, Aaron Smith, Ben Smith, in fantastic form for them. I'm going to go for the home side, the Stormers. I haven't picked them many times this season.
That's new for you.
Yeah, which hopefully isn't a bad omen. But I don't think it's going to be more than 2 or 3 points. It could even come down to a penalty kick here, successful or missed, in deciding the outcome of that game.
All right, Rob, are you going for the home side?
Garen says 2 or 3 points. I'll say Stormers by 1 or 2 points. So we're not differing too violently on that one.
Yeah.
Perhaps a narrow win for the Stormers. You just feel that at some stage, surely, the Stormers have got to click. I mean, they are still one of the biggest franchises in Super Rugby, just in terms of their spectator clout, what they offer at Newlands. You'd think that at some stage they've got to put it all together. Maybe that time has come. Having said that, of course, the Highlanders will certainly be thinking, wow, we can do 2 from 2 in South Africa, which would set them in a very strong position for a challenge for the playoffs. But it really is time for the Stormers to sort of spoil a New Zealand party, I think. And this could be the opportunity to do that. It looks as though it's, I think the Cape Town public will be very pleased by the fact that it's a 3 o'clock kickoff, the old traditional time, if you like, the old style Curry Cup kickoffs, if you like, where you play in mid-afternoon, nice conditions, the going should be firm, and you hope for a good game of rugby, with the Stormers maybe just getting that blend right between attack and defence, and getting both in order enough to knock over the Highlanders.
All right, so fingers crossed on that one. And our last game, Game 4, Garen, what are your predictions?
Well, that's the South African derby. It's the Bulls at home against the Cheetahs. That kicks off at 5 minutes past 5. We've got the Bulls coming back from their Australasian tour. They've made the flight over from Perth, where they lost all 4 of their games, up against the Cheetahs, who were really impressive last week against the Stormers. Countering that, the Bulls at home. We've talked many times about the home team having the advantage in these tight games. South African teams, when they play each other, they know each other so well. They know what to expect. South African ref in charge. It seems like a bit of a family affair, if you like. So again, a tight game. I think Rob and I might disagree on this one. I'm going against what I said about all the home teams being the favourites in these close games. I think I saw enough from the Cheetahs last week to suggest that they'll win it at Loftus, at altitude. Flip van der Merwe is still missing for the Bulls, which I think is key. Matt Field, although he's done really well, and Willems as Flip van der Merwe's replacement has done well, the Bulls front row, pack rather, just hasn't looked the same as they have in the past. The Cheetahs have got Kuni Oosthuizen on the bench. They've got Johan Goosen back on the bench. Be exciting to see him come on if he's over his injuries. So I'm going for a close match, but the Cheetahs, just to edge it and upset the home team record to date, Cheetahs by 2.
All right, Rob.
Could happen, Garen, but I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go with the Bulls. It's a very tight game to call, but I just think the Bulls, they're still marginally alive in the competition, Garen. They could still, their best hope, of course, as I wrote earlier this week, is the possibility that they could still nick the conference. If the Sharks have an absolute nightmare on tour, and let's face it, all South African teams have had a nightmare on tour, so you can't write off that possibility, which means that if the Bulls start stringing together a run of good wins at home, they could still perhaps, it's a long shot, but they could still nick the top franchise position in the conference. So they've got 3 games on the trot, in fact, coming up. So this is the first of 3, Garen. So you'd think that they'll be right up for it. They love playing at Loftus. They're back there for the first time in several weeks. And yes, they're still hampered, I think, by the fact that their breakdown game is very poor. I think the Cheetahs might just get the edge there. But I just think on the balance of things, maybe the Bulls will just have enough muscle to nick this one. So I'm going to go Bulls.
Well, loser brings chocolate for us on Monday. Garen, I know you do some great live updates and people can share the photos from the games. Why don't you tell everyone how they could do that?
Absolutely. The easiest way would be to log on to sport24.co.za, follow our live updates on all the South African games. If you're in Cape Town or in Pretoria this weekend, please send us your pictures. We'd love to include them in our gallery. And visit our Super Brew page and challenge us in your predictions.